Welcome into Bucs Insider Live. Casey Phillips here with senior writer and editor Scott Smith, who's being a very nice, considerate coworker. He's feeling a little under the weather, so he's protecting me and our producers in here so we do not take crud to our families for Thanksgiving. So Scott, thank you for that. Great move, very selfless over here. All right, so now we did not have a show, or we did have a show last week. We talked a little bit about the game in Germany, but now it's a bit of that bye week time where we can reassess some things, look at the big picture, and then of course look ahead to the Browns game as well. But first, we did have a bit of news, which is not always something that happens during the bye week time. But tell us about Giovanni Bernard and what is update with his injury situation.
Yeah, Gio has been on injured reserve since week 2, but he has been designated for return from injured reserve, which means he can now start practicing. And he did on Monday when we had the bonus practice, and he probably will again today and the rest of the week. And the Bucs now have a 21-day window in which he can practice with the team without counting against the 53-man roster. And then at some point during that window, you can activate him, which then would require another roster move to open up a spot. Last time we did this, it was with Josh Wells, and he was designated for return and then activated later the same week. So I would think we're going to see Gio back in action sooner rather than later.
Yeah, that would make sense. You don't want to do the 21-day window if you're worried you won't quite make it in that window.
Because, if you don't activate them by the end of the 21, then they're done for the year.
Right, yeah, so that makes a lot of sense. That'll be interesting. What do you see about when and if he becomes available, what that does to this running back room, and what you think you're going to see? Because, I mean, it seems like recently they've had a really great tandem going on and even getting Keyshawn Vaughn some snaps. So what does the addition of Gio mean for that group?
Well, you mentioned Keyshawn getting some snaps, but when you look at it, it's really like 2 in this game, 4 in this game. So there hasn't been a whole lot of work for a third running back, and now you're talking about a fourth one.
Right.
He would probably have to make some impact on special teams. He could even possibly mix in on kickoff return or punt return, because he's done both of those things in the past, to be active on game day. So it's a little hard to figure out exactly how he would fit into the offense at this moment. Although on the other hand, you do have Leonard Fournette's hip pointer to worry about. So he's, hip pointers usually take anywhere between 1 and 3 weeks to come back from. It's not like a muscle strain or anything. So hopefully he'll be back soon. But if for some reason Leonard would miss some time, then obviously it would be great to suddenly get back a third running back.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, well, like we said, we were going to do a little bit of big picture stuff coming off of the bye week, and one of those is the NFC Playoff Picture, which thankfully the Bucs are in as of right now. 5-5 may not be the record that they had anticipated or wanted for this point in the year, but thanks to an NFC South that is having some struggles. So take us through this playoff picture and what you think it means, especially for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but this bye week on Sunday, I sat down and watched a lot of football, because I don't really get to do that on Sundays very often.
And it's probably pretty funny for people to hear that we don't feel like we get to watch a lot of football.
We see our game, and we're working afterwards, and we watch highlights later. But Philadelphia had a close call against Indy, but they're still obviously the class of the NFC right now. Minnesota got absolutely demolished by Dallas, which will make people wonder how real they are as contenders, but they're 8-2, and you can't argue with that. And then San Fran was the big winner of the week, other than Dallas, because they won while Seattle was off, tied them, and have the head-to-head tiebreaker. So now San Fran replaces Seattle as the leader in the West, but the Bucs are only 1 game behind that. So you can see, in addition to trying to hold off Atlanta which thanks for nothing, Chicago, was an exciting game, but they didn't win. So Atlanta wins. They're not on this picture, but they're only a half game behind the Buccaneers. And, with that half-game difference until Atlanta has their bye in a couple weeks, it's always going to be, depending upon the outcomes, either team could end up in first place by a half game. So the Buccaneers will be playing Cleveland, Atlanta's going to play Washington, and, the Buccaneers could be anywhere from 1.5 games up to 0.5 down by the end of the weekend. But you got a pretty strong wild card group there with Dallas, Giants lost, Seattle. Those are pretty good teams, all with records better than the Bucs. So as far as making the playoffs down the stretch in these next 7 weeks, the Bucs really need to focus on obviously winning their division.
Yeah, and then you see the Cowboys and the Giants are going to be facing each other on Thursday, so one of them is at least going to have 1 more loss, which is going to be interesting to see. All right, so I know we talked about in that Germany game, one of the things we were really excited about was the idea of the explosive plays. We talked about the extended drives, but it was also the idea that some of those had some pretty big gains and big plays, when that had not been something we'd seen, even though I know this team knew this offense was capable of it. So what did you see about what was different for those plays and what that could mean moving forward?
Well, there were 2 things. One, Rachaad White brought sort of an explosive element to the running game. He had the 2 longest runs of the year for the Buccaneers, and generally with at least a decent running game, you expect at some point during the game to get 1 or 2 what we call explosive runs, or 10 yards or more, and explosive completions are 20 yards or more. And when you're missing that in your offense and you're trying to run the ball, it just really makes it hard to construct a real long drive. Most long drives have at least, you said it, have at least one big play in there somewhere. It's not just 6 yards down the field all the way. And then the other half of it is the offensive line had a fantastic game. Tom Brady had tons of time to throw and look downfield, and he got there's Scotty with the
acrobatic catch.
Well, I guess so. Oh, is this going to be the stiff arm play? Because we have to stop and watch.
Yeah, we all must stop. Yes. We all. I don't care how many times we watch that. We have to continue to watch it and just take a moment of silence to appreciate.
To mourn the loss of
the Seahawks defender, yeah.
And then in the passing game, there was lots of times for Tom Brady to throw, and he averaged 2.78 seconds from the snap to the throw, which is by far the highest average he's had all year. He's been getting rid of the ball really quickly, which makes it hard to let those downfield plays develop. So if you look at this, I mean, very nice start in many ways in the Week 1 win over Dallas, and including 10 explosive plays. But after that, 4, 2, 1, went back to 9. That's big. That's big.
You know, when I'm looking at that, the thing that jumps out to me is I feel like Dallas and Seattle were the 2 games that you had almost all, if not all, of your weapons.
Yeah, Julio Jones.
Julio Jones is a big part of both of those games having explosive plays, and it just, to me, says it's not so much that what this team is doing is right or wrong. It's just who you have available and out there, and to have more of your weapons available. And so that's a great sign of now, even coming off the bye week, hoping that that's the case moving forward, is that you just have the guys out there to run the playbook to get those explosive plays going. Yeah. And then finally, speaking of the health idea, I think that we've seen a huge factor in this defense is the return of Akiem Hicks. And we knew coming into the season, I mean, I think back to training camp, and we talked about how we thought he was getting more praise than potentially any other individual player on this team during training camp.
Yeah,
and
really
I think
was.
Now that we saw the team without him and with him, that it seems like that was accurate.
Yeah, and obviously health is an issue, and he had some issues with that in the previous years. But the Buccaneers felt when they signed him that if he's on the field, he really is a difference maker. He's doing exactly what the Bucs expected when they put him next to Vita Vea. When he's on the field, and Vita is too, that's just really hard to run against, because both those guys, as Will Golston was saying, both those guys are guys that the opposing team thinks they need to get 4 hands on in order to keep them at bay. And so they're eating up. Like, I don't think Akiem Hicks had a single stat in the Seattle game. But he clearly is making a difference, because in the 3 full games that he's played, the Buccaneers have allowed 59 rushing yards, 59.3 rushing yards per game. And the 6 full games that he didn't play, they allowed 148. That's a pretty big difference.
That is a large difference.
I didn't include the New Orleans game, which he played about half of before getting hurt. But the yards per carry, way better. No rushing touchdowns for 5. And look at those 10-plus yard runs. That's 1 per game with him in there, and about 4 per game with him out.
And it even reminds you of how incredible it is that Vita Vea has as many sacks as he has, when most of that was without Akiem Hicks, which means he was getting all of the attention. So now I'm really excited to see, with Akiem back more regularly, what that can mean for Vita.
Well, it's a good point. And in the win against the Rams, the coach Bowles said afterwards that with Akiem back, that allowed them to do some things, and they specifically schemed up some ideas to get Vita free. So that did make an impact, absolutely, in the Rams game.
All right, and then we'll close with this now, kind of being in this bye week time. It's a good time to kind of reassess the team. So what do you feel like are the biggest goals moving forward for this team, and then maybe even just starting with the Cleveland Browns to see where they're at this point in the season?
Well, I really like what Will Golston said on Monday. He said, he was asked about what they do during the bye, and he says, well, you have some time to assess. You get away from football a little bit, but you also look at how you prepared and how you played that game against Seattle, because, other than a sort of a little bit of a lapse at the end of the game, it was a dominant game in every phase, right, for the Buccaneers. So Will's like, we have to look at how we prepared for that game and the way in which we played, and we have to use that as a model for the next 7 weeks. So the bye came at a good time, not necessarily because of injury, because we weren't too beat up, but a good time for the Bucs, building some momentum and looking at it. If they had to look back at one game, it was nice that it was this one where they could learn this is how it looks.
Right.
This Bucs team in 2022 was not going to look the same as it did in 2020 and 2021. It just wasn't, and it clearly hasn't, and that's led to some struggles. But there's a lot of talent on this team, and they have to figure out the manner, the way in which they win, and I think they feel like they have found a blueprint and that they can duplicate that going forward.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it is great to see if this momentum can continue carrying forward, because this last game felt like the most complete game they've played.
Like I would say, there's a lot of things that the Buccaneers already do well. They're not hurting themselves in the passing game at all. They're first in the league in fewest sacks allowed per pass play and first in fewest interceptions per pass. So they're not hurting themselves. You know they can make explosive plays with Evans and Godwin and Jones and so on. Now, if you add in, hey, now we can run the ball. And if you add in, hey, now we have time to throw and get explosive plays. And then on defense, we know we got a lot of talent there. But if you add in, now we're stopping the run. If you can do all those things, that just accentuates the strengths that you already have.
Right.
And so you could see a team that is a little closer to the dominant form of the last couple of years. All
right, well, that's going to do it for us on this edition of Bucs Insider Live. Thank you so much for being with us, and we'll be back here next week to talk about that Cleveland Browns game.